They called her ruined. A woman with a past the frontier wasn't ready to forgive. In a town where whispers could destroy a soul, one quiet rancher stepped forward, looked the gossips in the eye, and said, "I've got a spare room, and I don't care what they think." That single act of defiance rippled across the plains and set the stage for something far bigger than charity. Tonight, we're leaving the Hollywood version of the West behind and walking straight into the dust, the heartbreak, and the unbreakable spirit of real men and women who faced impossible odds. These aren't legends carved into pulp novels. They're true American West stories, gathered from letters, newspaper clippings, and the memories of those who lived them. You'll meet a shamed woman who found refuge where she least expected it, an outlaw who discovered that redemption wears a blacksmith's apron, and a widow who taught a cattle baron that some lines can't be bought. They all had one thing in common. When the world told them to stay small, they stood tall. So grab a cup of coffee, settle into your chair, and let the past speak. These three stories will change the way you see courage. The spring of 1883 came late to the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, and with it arrived a woman the town of Stevensville had already decided to hate before she stepped off the stagecoach. Her name was Cordelia Vance, and she carried nothing but a worn carpetbag and a baby wrapped in a faded quilt. The gossip had traveled ahead of her like a dust storm. She was the daughter of a respectable merchant back in Ohio who had been seduced and abandoned by a traveling salesman, left with a child and no ring. A disgrace so profound her own family had put her on a westbound coach with $100 and a prayer. In Stevensville, a place where a person's worth was measured in church attendance and unblemished reputations, Cordelia might as well have had "Scarlet Woman" branded on her forehead. The local women crossed the street when they saw her. The boarding house suddenly had no vacancy. And even the kindly Methodist minister suggested she might find work down in the Mayan camps, the kind of work that needed no questions asked. With her coins dwindling and her infant son Josiah growing thinner by the day, Cordelia found herself sitting on a bench outside the general store one cold afternoon, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks, while the townsfolk pretended she was invisible. That was when Amos Fletcher walked up. Amos was a cattleman who lived 6 miles out of town on a modest spread that had seen better days. His wife had died of influenza 2 winters prior, leaving him alone with a big empty house and a heart that ached in the silences. He was a man of few words, square-jawed and weathered, the kind who said grace before meals, even when nobody was watching. He'd seen the way the town was treating Cordelia, and it had been eating at him like a slow poison. Standing there on the boardwalk, he took off his hat, looked her straight in the eye, and said the words that would rattle every parlor in the county. "Mom, I've got a spare room out at my place, and I don't care what they think. You and your boy need a roof, and I need the sound of people in that house again. It's a fair trade." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a bowie knife. Cordelia stared at him, searching for the catch, the hidden cruelty that life had taught her to expect. But Amos's eyes held nothing but a quiet decency. She nodded, unable to speak. He picked up her carpetbag, helped her into his wagon, and drove her right past the gaping townsfolk without so much as a glance back. That night, the gossip exploded like a powder keg. The barber claimed Amos had taken a fallen woman under his roof and would surely be damned. The dressmaker whispered that Cordelia was probably a seductress who'd sink her claws into the poor widower. A group of concerned citizens even rode out to his ranch to warn him that he was bringing shame on the whole community. Amos met them on his porch with a Winchester cradled in his arms, not pointed, just present, and said, "You all can go back to town and tell everybody that the only shame I see is how you treated a mother and her child. Now get off my land." They left in a huff, and over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Cordelia, it turned out, was no wilting flower. She'd grown up keeping books for her father's business, and she set about organizing Amos's chaotic finances. Discovering that his ranch was actually far more profitable than he'd realized if only he managed his sales differently. She cooked meals that filled the house with the smell of fresh bread and venison stew. She insisted on earning her keep, and when Amos refused to take payment, she started a small vegetable garden and sold the surplus to the very town that had shunned her. At first, nobody bought a thing. Then, the town doctor, a practical man named Elias Crane, started purchasing her carrots and potatoes because they were simply better than what the general store offered. The schoolteacher, a young woman named Prudence Hart, who had silently disapproved of the town's cruelty, followed suit. Slowly, Cordelia's produce began appearing on dinner tables across Stevensville, and with each meal, the stain on her reputation faded a little. Amos and Cordelia never married, though the town expected it. Instead, they formed a partnership built on mutual respect, running the ranch together and raising little Josiah into a bright, laughing boy who would later become the first person from Stevensville to attend a university back east. In the autumn of 1885, the same women who had once shunned Cordelia organized a church social and specifically invited her, not out of guilt, but because they had genuinely come to admire her strength. Cordelia accepted, walked into that church hall with her head high, and took her place at the community table. Amos watched from the back of the room with a quiet smile, knowing that a single spare room, offered without conditions, had not just saved a woman and her child. It had taught an entire town how to be human again. The story of Fletcher's Folly, as it was mockingly called at first, became a cherished local legend whispered around campfires well into the 20th century, a reminder that the Old West wasn't only about gunfights and gold rushes, but about the extraordinary courage of ordinary people who decided that doing the right thing mattered more than what anyone else thought. In the rugged foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of northern New Mexico, there was a man named Tiago Rivera, who, by the age of 27, had already spent 8 years behind the stone walls of the territorial prison in Santa Fe for a stagecoach robbery that had gone wrong. When he was released in the dry summer of 1879, the world outside seemed to have no place for him. His family had disowned him. The little village of Truchas where he'd grown up viewed him with fear, and the only work he could find was mucking out stables in the dusty town of Las Vegas, New Mexico. Tiago was a man haunted by the ghost of his younger self, a hot-headed boy who'd fallen in with a gang of rustlers after his father died of consumption, leaving the family destitute. Prison had reshaped him, not through brutality, but through an unexpected friendship with an old Franciscan friar who visited the cells every week and taught him to read using a battered Bible and a collection of Shakespeare's plays. By the time Tiago walked out of those gates, he could recite whole passages from Hamlet and The Tempest, and he carried in his chest a desperate, burning desire to become a good man, even if he had no earthly idea how to do it. His chance came on a blistering afternoon in August, when the weekly stage from Santa Fe to Las Vegas was making its slow, creaking journey through Glorieta Pass. On board were a young couple from Boston, Elias and Margaret Thorne, along with their 4-year-old daughter Clara, who was clutching a rag doll and singing a nonsense song about rabbits. They were homesteaders, green to the west, carrying their life savings in a strongbox to purchase land near the Pecos River. Tiago, who had taken a job as an outrider for the stage line, the only employer willing to take a chance on an ex-convict, was riding about half a mile ahead, scanning the rocky terrain for trouble. He spotted the dust cloud before he heard the hoofbeats. 5 riders coming hard and fast out of a dry arroyo, bandanas pulled over their faces, rifles glinting in the harsh sun. His heart lurched. He knew that look. He'd been that look a decade ago. The stage driver, an old-timer named Gus McCready, snapped the reins and shouted for the horses to run, but the heavily laden coach could never outpace the Outlaw's lean Mustangs. Within minutes, the bandits had surrounded the stage, yanking open the door and dragging the Thorne family out into the dirt. The leader, a scar-faced brute named Harlan Cross, who Tiago had unfortunately known in prison, laughed when he saw the strongbox. "Why, ain't this a pretty picture?" Cross growled, cocking his revolver. "You folks just saved me a month of hard work." Elias Thorne, pale but brave, stepped in front of his wife and child. "Take the money, just don't hurt my family." Cross shrugged. "I ain't inclined to leave witnesses, friend." That was when Tiago made his choice. He'd been hanging back, unseen, behind a cluster of pinyon pines. He could have stayed hidden. Nobody would have blamed him. He was one man against five, armed with only a single-action Colt and a skinning knife. But the sight of that little girl, Clara, her rag doll, now trampled in the dust, kindled something in him that burned hotter than any fear. He dug his heels into his horse's flanks and burst from cover, firing a shot that took the hat clean off Cross's head. "Harlan!" Tiago shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "You remember me? You remember the mess hall in Santa Fe, where you stole my bread and I broke your jaw? Well, I'm out now, and I'm not letting you do this." Cross spun around, eyes wide with shock and fury. "Tiago Rivera, I heard you turned soft. Looks like you turned stupid, too." What followed was chaos gunfire. Screaming horses, dust so thick you couldn't see 5 feet. Tiago's prison-honed reflexes served him well. He shot 2 of the bandits from the saddle before a bullet grazed his ribs, a searing line of fire that nearly unhorsed him. Cross, enraged, charged at him, and they tumbled to the ground, grappling in the dirt like animals. Tiago got his knife free and drove it into Cross's shoulder, not to kill, but to disable. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader down, lost their nerve and scattered into the arroyo. When the dust settled, Tiago was bleeding heavily, his shirt soaked red, but he was alive. The Thorne family was shaken but unharmed, and Gus McCready, the driver, was staring at Tiago as if seeing a ghost. "You saved this, son," Gus said, his voice trembling. "You're a hero." The word felt foreign, almost painful. Tiago had been called many things in his life: outlaw, convict, disgrace, but never hero. The story made the Santa Fe New Mexican newspaper the next week, and suddenly, everyone in the territory wanted to meet the reformed stagecoach robber who had stood alone against the gang. The Thornes, grateful beyond measure, used a portion of their savings to help Tiago purchase a small smithy in Las Vegas, setting him up as a blacksmith, a trade that respected a man for his work, not his past. Tiago took to it with fierce dedication, forging horseshoes and repairing wagon wheels with an artistry that soon drew customers from 50 miles around. But the real transformation was internal. He began visiting the local school on Sunday afternoons, not to preach, but to teach the children to read, passing on the gift the old friar had given him. He became known as Maestro Tiago, and when parents expressed concern about an ex-convict around their kids, the Thornes and Gus McCready would show up to vouch for him with such fervor that the criticism evaporated. In 1886, 7 years after that day in Glorieta Pass, Tiago was elected town constable of Las Vegas, a stunning turnabout that nobody could have predicted. His badge sat a little crooked on his chest, but it shone bright. When asked by a young reporter why he'd risked his life for strangers, Tiago smiled and said something he'd learned from the Tempest. What's past is prologue. A man isn't the sum of his mistakes, he's the sum of what he does next. His story became a legend of the Southern Rockies, proof that the frontier could not only punish sinners, but also transform them into saints, one brave choice at a time. Along the windswept plains of the Texas Panhandle, where the sky stretches so wide, it makes a person feel both insignificant and infinite. Ada McCrae had buried her husband, Jeremiah, in the spring of 1891 after a bout of pneumonia that took him in just 4 agonizing days. They had homesteaded 640 acres near the Canadian River, a patch of land with good water and sweet grass that Jeremiah had won in a land lottery after serving in the Union Army. Now Ada was alone, a woman of 42 with sun-browned skin, calloused hands, and the kind of stubborn jaw that suggested she'd been carved from the very red clay beneath her feet. The vultures started circling before the dirt had even settled on Jeremiah's grave. Harlan Decker, owner of the sprawling Bardee Ranch that stretched across 3 counties, had been trying to acquire that 640 acres for years. Jeremiah had always refused to sell. Decker figured a widow would be easy to pressure, so he sent his foreman, a sneering man named Clyde Riggins, to offer Ada a generous price, roughly a tenth of what the land was worth. Ada stood on her porch in a faded calico dress, a shotgun cradled in her arms, and listened to Riggins's condescending speech about how ranching was no life for a woman alone. When he finished, she spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground, a habit she'd picked up from Jeremiah, just to shock busybodies, and said, "You tell Harlan Decker that Ada McCrae ain't selling. Not for a tenth of what it's worth, and not for a fortune. Now get off my land before I decide that shotgun needs practice." Riggins left red-faced, and the war was on. Decker, a man who had built his empire by breaking smaller ranchers, began a campaign of quiet sabotage. Ada's fences were cut in the night. Her cattle were driven into ravines. A small barn she used for storing hay was set ablaze, and though she managed to save most of it, the message was clear: leave or be destroyed. The local sheriff, a timid man named Orville Peabody, who owed his position to Decker's influence, told Ada with an apologetic shrug that there was nothing he could do without evidence. So Ada decided to get her own evidence. She spent 3 consecutive nights huddled in a cold hollow near her northeast pasture, wrapped in a buffalo robe, watching. On the 4th night, her patience paid off. 2 of Decker's ranch hands, silhouetted against a sliver of moon, rode up with wire cutters. Ada waited until they were fully engaged in their dirty work. Then she stood up, shotgun leveled, and said, "Evening, boys. I've got enough shells here to make both of you leak worse than a sieve. Drop the cutters and start talking, or we'll find out if the Lord's feeling merciful tonight." The 2 men, young cowboys named Jake and Lem, who were more scared of Ada than they were of Decker, confessed everything. The next morning, Ada hitched up her wagon and drove straight into the town of Clarendon, with the 2 cowboys riding alongside her under the watchful eye of her shotgun. She marched them right into Sheriff Peabody's office and made them repeat their confessions in front of a hastily gathered crowd of townsfolk, including the editor of the local newspaper, a fiery Irishman named Seamus O'Toole. The story exploded. "Widow catches ranch hands red-handed," blared the headline, and suddenly Harlan Decker's bullying tactics were the talk of every saloon and church social from Amarillo to Mobeetie. But Decker was not a man who accepted defeat. Enraged, he assembled a crew of 15 riders and announced that he was going to escort Ada McCrae off her land personally, claiming she was a squatter with a faulty claim a lie, but one he had the money to make stick in a crooked court. What Decker didn't count on was the other small ranchers and homesteaders in the area, people who had suffered under his heel for years and were just waiting for a rallying point. The widow McCrae had become exactly that. When Decker and his men rode up to Ada's ranch, they found not one woman with a shotgun, but 17 armed homesteaders, men and women, standing shoulder to shoulder along the fence line. There was old Gus Lindstrom, a Swedish wheat farmer who'd had his water rights stolen. There was the Benteen family, whose son had been beaten by Decker's men for protesting a fence that blocked a public trail. And there, in the center, was Ada McCrae, holding a Winchester rifle and wearing Jeremiah's old Union Army cap as a symbol of defiance. "You want this land, Decker?" she called out, her voice carrying clear and strong across the prairie wind. "You're going to have to water it with blood, and the first drops are going to be yours." There was a long, tense silence. Decker's men shifted in their saddles, suddenly realizing they hadn't signed up for a pitched battle against their own neighbors. Decker himself turned an ugly shade of purple, but he was no fool. Outnumbered and facing a public relations catastrophe that even he couldn't buy his way out of, he spat a curse, wheeled his horse, and rode off. The standoff became known as McCrae's Line, and it shifted the balance of power in the Panhandle. Ada's bravery sparked a series of legal challenges against Decker's land grabs, and within 2 years, the Bardi Ranch was broken up under federal scrutiny. Ada, meanwhile, prospered. She turned her homestead into a thriving cattle operation, hired a crew of misfits and outcasts that nobody else would employ, and became a beloved figure who was always willing to lend a hand to a struggling neighbor. When she finally passed away in 1924 at the age of 75, the entire town of Clarendon closed down for her funeral. The preacher said it best: "She didn't just hold her ground. She showed us all what ground was worth holding." Her story remains a testament to the fact that true grit doesn't come from a holster. It comes from a heart that refuses to be bullied. And those, friends, are the stories that don't always make it into the history books, but they're the ones that built the West. Cordelia found shelter not just in a spare room, but in the stubborn kindness of one man who refused to look away. Tiago discovered that a man's past doesn't have to write his future, that redemption can be forged in a blacksmith's fire. Ada proved that courage isn't measured by the size of your fists, but by the size of your heart when everything's on the line. These aren't just tales of survival. They're roadmaps for how to be human in a hard world. If any of these stories resonated with you, if they made you think about the spare rooms, second chances, and brave stands in your own life, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Tap that bell so you won't miss the next journey into the true West. We read every comment, and we'd love to know which story touched you most. Until next time, keep the fire burning and the stories alive. This is West Old Stories Official, signing off.